Okay, so my refutation speech isn't from Avidan. His major claim was sweatshops are beneficial to poor developing third world countries. My major claim is that they're not beneficial. One definition that he used was a factory or a workshop, especially in clothing industry where manual workers are employed at very low wages for long hours and under poor working conditions, are sweatshops. So his secondary claims were sweatshops cause economic development in third world countries. Number 2 is workers benefit from working in sweatshops. Number 3 is working in sweatshop is better than other present alternatives. First, I would diminish his claim that sweatshops cause economic development in third world countries. One thing that he didn't define well what a third world country is. According to One World Nations Online, after World War II, the world split into 2 large geopolitical blocs and spheres influenced with contrary views on government and the political correct society. First world country will be the bloc of democratic industrial countries within the American influence. Second world country is the Eastern Bloc of communist socialist states. And the third world country is the remaining 3/4 of the world's population, states not aligned with either bloc. So that is important because I think a lot of people assume third world countries as being divided by they don't have that much money, or it's kind of divided by first world country having the most money and second falling into that category, and the third because they don't have money. My opponent also said that Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and South Korea were third world countries that had sweatshops to show that sweatshops play a role in countries' growth in economy. But those 4 countries are actually considered the Asian tigers, and after the Second World War, there were the second group of rapidly growing economies. And they believe that formal education played a huge role in the process of this development. And their development influenced the relationship with neighboring powers to other countries were able to help, like South Korea. And that shows that the sweatshops alone did not help them become better in their economy. And then for his secondary claim, I would dismiss my opponent by, he said that the average pay at Nike factory in Vietnam is $54 a month, almost 3 times the minimum wage for state-owned enterprise. And I wanted to point out that a state-owned enterprise is different than a multinational firm, and that's what Nike is. And just quickly, I'm going to just tell you what a state-owned enterprise is. A legal entity that is created by the government in order to partake in commercial activities on the government's behalf. A state-owned enterprise can either be wholly or partially owned by the government and is typically marked to participate in commercial activities. And then that is important because it kind of shows not all state-owned enterprises have the sources available to provide more. And according to Feminist.org, Nike can cut less than 1% of their advertising budget, and the wages could be doubled for all workers making the Nike University clothing. In his third secondary claim, where he talks about working in sweatshops are better alternatives than other present alternatives, he used a citation by Elise Amex, author of the article Reconciling the Good and Evil Sweatshops. He told us, in one famous 1983 case, U.S. Senator Tom Harkin proposed banning imports from countries that employ children in sweatshops. In response to a factory in Bangladesh laid off 50,000 children, what was their best alternative? According to the British charity Oxfam, a large number of them became prostitutes. But the next paragraph says, okay, so happy Hondurans are working in sweatshops rather than roaming the streets as prostitutes, but I'm not ready to write I love sweatshops all over my notebook. What about withheld wages, violent force, and rape occurring in the job? This is exploitation, which shows that the source that he got that from, he kind of manipulated it to show that if they weren't working in sweatshops, they would be out there in the streets. But a lot of things actually occur in the sweatshops that might be as worse as working as another alternative. And that's why I feel that his claims were not enough to support his major claim.
All right, so the main point is identified. Why you bother giving us another definition of the sweatshops and those issues, I'm not quite sure. On the first point, I like the idea that you are saying that his definition of these as being third world countries is problematic, and in essence suggesting that a lot of the people in those particular populations were never going to be in the third world status that the advocate's talking about. That maybe he's conflating the idea of being underdeveloped nations with third world nations and that they are different. The idea of those 4 countries that you mentioned being the Asian tigers and their growth is a result of rapid improvement of education, and that's what's linked to the economic issue. I think that's a good point. Your evidence on that, though, is not really presented. It seems like you've read something, you've got information on this, but the evidence hasn't been put into the argument. And if they didn't use the sweatshops or those low-wage, high-productivity types of factories in those places, you ought to be able to demonstrate that a little bit. It sounds to me like it's not so much that they didn't use them at all, but rather that there's a better explanation for their success in the long run, and I think that that's probably the stronger argument to make here, but then you also need the evidence to go along with that. The whole argument talking about international companies versus state-owned companies are invested, well, you spend some time defining what the state-owned means, so on and so forth. How does that advance the claim? How does that refute the argument that the advocate's presenting? I can see that you've got a dispute here, and maybe there's a way that your reasoning here is going to apply, but I couldn't follow that reasoning, and I don't know what inference I'm supposed to draw from that, and so that's important. You need to tell us what the conclusion is. You're kind of presenting information and expecting us to be able to draw an inference. You're the one who should be making the declarative statement there. On the last point, I think you're a little bit clearer here, arguing that the information has been taken out of context and that it doesn't really justify justify that sweatshops are automatically a better alternative. And you do have, I think a pretty valid quote here that says, "Well, I don't love sweatshirts. Yeah, I like sweatshirts too. Sweatshops, but the idea that the alternative of staying in the sweatshop is equally problematic, that's a very generic kind of statement there, and they got 50,000 people who lost jobs versus somebody who may be abused in the sweatshop environment. We don't have any data on that. This is the place where I think you need to provide that stuff about how horrifying the sweatshops are and all that kind of stuff. What was Harkin talking about when he said maybe we ought to get out of this business with these people, we ought to protest, all those kinds of things? Well, if the kids were being tortured or they were being deprived of food or if there was sexual abuse that was going on, well, let's hear about all those kinds of things. You've got a little teeny bit of information on that, and I'm sure that there's got to be more on it, and that would make the argument maybe more convincing. All right, thank you.